Ibn Gabirol, the philosopher-poet of Andalusia. Solomon ibn Gabirol, born in Malaga in the early 11th century, was a monumental figure whose life and work embodied the intellectual and cultural efflorescence of Andalusia. Known by his Latin name, Avisebron, he was a philosopher and poet of profound depth and originality. His life was marked by a unique blend of intellectual precocity, personal tragedy, and a peripatetic existence, yet it was against this backdrop that he produced works of astonishing genius. As a philosopher, he was a champion of Neoplatonism, a school of thought that sought to reconcile the philosophy of Plato with the religious traditions of the Abrahamic faiths. As a poet, he was a master of Hebrew verse, crafting liturgical hymns and secular poems of unparalleled beauty and emotional power. Ibn Gabirol's identity as a philosopher-poet is not a mere biographical footnote. It is central to understanding his intellectual project. His poetry, often deeply personal and suffused with a sense of loneliness and longing, was a vehicle for exploring metaphysical themes such as the nature of the soul, the distance of God, and the search for spiritual truth. Conversely, his philosophical work, particularly Fons Vitae, is characterized by a poetic and lyrical quality that elevates it beyond a dry academic treatise. Living in a vibrant, multilingual society that was a crossroads for Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scholars, Ibn Gabirol was uniquely positioned to draw from multiple traditions and to articulate a philosophical vision that resonated with thinkers from all three faiths. He was a product of his time and place, yet his genius transcended both, leaving a legacy that would profoundly impact intellectual history for centuries. Substance and form, the essence of Ibn Gabirol's thought. The core of Ibn Gabirol's metaphysics is a groundbreaking and controversial theory concerning substance and form. While Aristotelian philosophy posited that all physical objects are a composite of matter and form, Ibn Gabirol took this idea to an unprecedented and radical conclusion. He argued that all created beings, from the highest spiritual intelligences down to the lowest earthly matter, are a composite of a universal substance and a universal form. This means that even the angels and other spiritual entities, which were traditionally thought to be simple and incorporeal, are in fact a composite of these two principles. According to Ibn Gabirol, the universal substance is a prime matter that is a substratum for all existence, and the universal form is the principle that gives it a particular shape and nature. He conceived of these as two distinct and co-eternal principles that emanated from the divine will. This was a radical departure from both Aristotelian and Neoplatonic thought, which generally held that spiritual entities were pure form or intellect. By extending the principle of matter-form composition to the entire created cosmos, Ibn Gabirol created a unified and systematic account of reality. For him, the only being that is not a composite of substance and form is God himself, who is the ultimate source of both. This theory gave rise to the term universal hylomorphism, and it was a concept that would prove to be deeply influential, particularly among Franciscan thinkers in the Christian scholastic tradition, who saw it as a powerful philosophical tool. Fons Vitae, the Fountain of Life Explained. Ibn Gabirol's most celebrated and influential philosophical work is Fons Vitae, or The Fountain of Life. Originally written in Arabic, it was translated into Latin in the 12th century, where it became a foundational text for medieval European philosophy. The book is structured as a dialogue between a master and his disciple, a format that lends it a sense of philosophical inquiry and didactic clarity. In this work, Ibn Gabirol lays out his entire metaphysical system, with a primary focus on his theory of universal hylomorphism and his cosmology of emanation. Fons Vitae begins by positing the existence of a single, transcendent God, from whom all things emanate. The first emanation is the divine will, which acts as the intermediary between God and the created world. From the will, two universal principles, the universal substance, matter, and the universal form, emanate. These two principles then combine and differentiate to create the entire hierarchy of being, from the highest spiritual entities to the physical world. The book meticulously traces this chain of being, explaining how each level of reality is a different composite of universal substance and universal form. Fons Vitae is not just a work of metaphysics, it is also a spiritual guide, as its ultimate purpose is to lead the human soul, through an understanding of this cosmic order, back to its divine source. For this reason, it was studied by both philosophers and mystics, and its ideas shaped the intellectual landscape of medieval Europe for centuries. Divine emanation and the chain of being. Ibn Gabirol's cosmology is a sophisticated system of divine emanation that provides a systematic explanation for the creation and structure of the universe. This model is a unique synthesis of Neoplatonic concepts which he adapted to his own theological and philosophical framework. The process begins with God, the ultimate and utterly simple unity, who cannot be described by any attributes or names. Out of God's infinite simplicity, the first emanation is the divine will. This will is the creative force that acts as the bridge between the transcendent, uncreated God and the created world. From this will, a twofold principle of creation emerges, a universal substance and a universal form. These two principles are the raw materials of all created reality. From their combination, a hierarchy of being, or a chain of being, is formed. This chain proceeds from the most spiritual to the most material. At the top are the highest intelligences and angelic spheres, which are composed of a very subtle substance and a highly potent form. As the chain descends, the substance becomes coarser and the form less potent, until it reaches the lowest level of physical matter. This hierarchical structure is a central tenet of his philosophy, as it not only explains the origins of the cosmos, but also provides a roadmap for the human soul's journey back to its divine source. Each level of the hierarchy is a reflection of the one above it, and by understanding this order, the soul can begin its ascent to union with God. The soul's ascent in Ibn Gabirol's cosmology. In Ibn Gabirol's philosophical system, the human soul is a central figure in his cosmology, and its journey is a core theme in his work. He conceived of the soul as a spiritual substance, a composite of substance and form that is temporarily united with a physical body. The soul is a microcosm of the entire cosmos, containing within itself all the principles of being. Its origin is divine, a direct emanation from the highest intellectual spheres. However, in its descent into the physical body, it becomes veiled by the passions and limitations of matter. The ultimate purpose of the soul, according to Ibn Gabirol, is to realize its true nature and to begin its ascent back to its divine source. This ascent is not a physical journey, but an intellectual and spiritual one. It is accomplished through the acquisition of knowledge, particularly the knowledge of the cosmic order as described in his theory of emanation. By contemplating the hierarchy of being and understanding how all things proceed from and return to God, the soul purifies itself from the distractions of the material world.
The final stage of this journey is the intellectual union with the active intellect, which is the highest celestial intelligence and the closest created being to the divine source. This union is a state of ultimate bliss and a return to the soul's original pure state. Thus, for Gabirol, philosophical inquiry is not just an academic exercise. It is the primary means of salvation and the path to spiritual liberation.
Jewish Neoplatonism. Ibn Gabirol's unique synthesis. Ibn Gabirol is widely recognized as the most significant exponent of Jewish Neoplatonism in the medieval period. His philosophy represents a unique and powerful synthesis of ideas drawn from Greek Neoplatonic thinkers, such as Plotinus, with the theological and religious tenets of Judaism. In doing so, he provided a profound philosophical framework for understanding key Jewish concepts. The central challenge for Jewish philosophers was to reconcile the radical monotheism of Judaism with philosophical concepts like emanation, which could be interpreted as compromising God's unity. Ibn Gabirol addressed this by positing that the entire process of emanation, from the highest spiritual entities down to the physical world, originates from a single, transcendent God. He used his theory of universal hylarmophism to explain how God, through his divine will, creates all things from two universal principles, thus maintaining God's absolute unity as the sole creator. Furthermore, his cosmology provided a philosophical basis for understanding the human soul's relationship to God, the nature of revelation, and the meaning of religious law. He saw philosophical contemplation as the highest form of worship, a way for the soul to connect with its divine source. His work gave a profound metaphysical depth to Jewish religious life, making him a foundational figure in Jewish philosophy and a major influence on the later development of Kabbalah. From poetry to metaphysics, a dual legacy. Ibn Gabirol's legacy is defined by his dual genius as both a master poet and a profound metaphysician. For him, these two vocations were not separate and distinct. They were two different expressions of the same fundamental search for truth. His poetry, written in a masterful and elegant Hebrew, is often a philosophical reflection in verse. His most famous liturgical poem, Keter Malchut, The Royal Crown, is a sublime work that moves from a detailed description of the cosmic order, mirroring the structure of his philosophical work, to a humble and personal prayer of a soul seeking to understand and connect with God. Conversely, his philosophical masterpiece, Fons Vitae, is imbued with a poetic and mystical quality. Its lyrical prose and the powerful imagery of a hierarchy of being emanating from a divine fountain give it a resonance that is not found in a typical philosophical treatise. For Ibn Gabirol, both poetry and philosophy were instruments for the soul's ascent. Poetry could convey the emotional and spiritual longing for God, while philosophy provided the intellectual roadmap for that journey. His dual legacy demonstrates that for a true genius, the boundaries between art and science, and between faith and reason are not rigid.
He used both poetry and philosophy to explore the deepest questions of existence, creating a body of work that is as aesthetically beautiful as intellectually rigorous.
Ibn Gabirol's influence on Christian scholasticism. Ibn Gabirol's philosophical masterpiece, Fons Vitae, had an extraordinary and unexpected impact on Christian scholasticism. Translated into Latin by Dominicus Gundesalinus and Johannes Hispanus in the 12th century, the work was introduced to the Latin West without the author's name or religious identity. The translators assumed the author was a Christian or a Muslim and referred to him as Avisebron. Due to the work's deep Neoplatonic influences and its theological compatibility with certain Christian ideas, it was widely studied and highly regarded. Christian scholastics, particularly those of the Franciscan school in the 13th and 14th centuries, were profoundly influenced by Ibn Gabirol's theory of universal hylomorphism. Figures like Duns Scotus and Saint Bonaventure found his idea that all created beings, including spiritual ones, are a composite of matter and form to be a powerful philosophical tool. It provided a compelling argument for the distinction between God and all created beings and for the unity of creation. His cosmology of emanation also shaped scholastic discussions on the nature of creation and the hierarchy of being. It was only much later that scholars discovered the true identity of the author, and that Avisebron was in fact the Jewish philosopher Solomon ibn Gabirol. This historical irony is a testament to the power of his ideas to transcend religious and cultural boundaries and to shape the intellectual history of a different civilization. The ethics of knowledge in Ibn Gabirol's philosophy. In Ibn Gabirol's philosophy, the pursuit of knowledge is not a morally neutral or purely academic exercise. It is an ethical and spiritual imperative. He argued that the highest purpose of human life is to achieve intellectual perfection, and that this perfection is inseparable from a moral and spiritual ascent. For him, knowledge of the cosmos and the divine order is the primary means by which the human soul purifies itself and returns to its divine source. Ibn Gabirol's metaphysics provides a clear ethical roadmap. By contemplating the hierarchy of being and understanding how all things are ultimately a composite of a universal substance and form, the soul can free itself from the illusion and passions of the material world. This act of intellectual purification is an ethical act because it involves the mastery of the lower, material part of the soul by the higher, rational part. The ultimate goal of this pursuit is not just to understand the divine will, but to align one's own will with it. For Ibn Gabirol, a life dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge is, by its very nature, a virtuous life. This synthesis of epistemology and ethics is a core part of his philosophical project, and it places him firmly in the tradition of ancient philosophers who saw philosophy as a way of life, not just a body of knowledge. Spiritual intuition and philosophical reason. Ibn Gabirol's philosophical work reflects a profound and sophisticated interplay between philosophical reason and spiritual intuition. While he was a master of logical argument and systematic metaphysics, his ultimate goal was to lead the soul to a state of contemplative union with the divine, a state that transcends pure reason. For Ibn Gabirol, reason is the essential tool for this journey, but it is not the final destination.
He believed that through the rigorous application of reason, the human mind could grasp the principles of creation, understand the hierarchy of being, and intellectually comprehend the nature of the divine. This is the realm of philosophy. However, the final leap to an intimate, personal, and loving relationship with God requires something more: spiritual intuition. This is a higher, more direct form of knowledge, a kind of unmediated vision of the divine that is not accessed through logical deduction, but through a contemplative purification of the soul. In his poetry, particularly Keter Malhut, he often describes this journey from rational understanding to a humble, intuitive awe in the face of God's infinite majesty. This interplay between reason and intuition is a hallmark of his thought, demonstrating that for Ibn Gabirol, the path to ultimate truth requires both the systematic rigor of philosophy and the contemplative surrender of the mystical soul.